There is a name that does not appear on any manifest, not in the Terran military's public registry, not in the Interstellar Coalition's shared personnel database, not in the casualty reports from Vega Station. And that battle had casualties. 43 species worth of them, logged down to the individual identification chip. Her name is not there. I checked 3 times, then a fourth, because I am nothing if not thorough in the ways that destroy my sleep cycle. The here is what is logged. A series of incident flags, 11 of them, across 4 different theatres of operation, spanning 19 months. Each flag issued by a different commanding officer. Each flag citing a different infraction. Insubordination. Unauthorized tactical deviation. Destruction of coalition property. Theft of coalition property. Gifting of coalition property to a civilian population during an active quarantine zone. That one I had to read twice. And most recently, one filed simply as Other. 11 flags. 0 reprimands. 0. Every single one reviewed and closed with a notation that reads, in the formal language of our coalition bureaucracy, incident nullified. No further action. 11 times, someone in a very senior position looked at a file full of chaos and a name attached to it and wrote, no further action. I want you to understand what that means. In 32 years of coalition service, I have seen officers reprimanded for lateness. I once watched a Drenathi sub-commander lose a rank pip because he sneezed during a treaty signing. They called it a diplomatic incident. They weren't entirely wrong. And he spent 6 months in administrative review. She has 11 flags and 0 consequences. And when I finally found a unit that had served alongside her, actually been in the same trench, the same corridor, the same burning debris field we are calling a trench, I asked them directly. I said, who is she? What is she? The sergeant, a Voth male, 312 kilograms of combat experience and decorated service, looked at me. Then he looked at the floor. Then he looked back at me and said, very quietly, she's the reason I'm having this conversation instead of not having any conversations at all. He didn't say anything else. I have been trying to reconstruct her from the margins of other people's stories ever since. From the incident flags and the closed file notations, and the things people say when they think they're done talking, and then say, anyway, in smaller voices, at the end. This is what I found. I'm going to start time-stamping these entries. I know I don't have to. I know the log system does it automatically in the header. I'm doing it anyway, at the top of every entry, manually, because the first 3 days of this assignment have made me feel like time itself is doing something wrong, and I want to prove to myself it isn't. I should be sleeping. I am not sleeping. I am sitting in a borrowed office on Meridian Station with a mug of reheated keth broth that tastes like someone boiled a sock in mineral water. The station's food synthesizers are calibrated for Drenathi biology, not Velhari, and I am very much Velhari, which means everything here tastes like it has given up. And I am reading a file for the 6th time. The file is 47 pages long. 39 of those pages are flags supporting documentation, incident reports, and the closed file notations I mentioned. The other 8 pages are the original personnel record. 8 pages. For a 12-year service history, 12 years of active deployment, and the Coalition produced 8 pages. I've seen longer files on officers who served 2 years and spent most of that time on administrative rotation. I've written longer files. My personal expense reports from last quarter are longer than this file, and most of those pages are me explaining why I needed a second portable data unit when the first one got confiscated during the Jeth Station mess. That's a separate story, and I'm still bitter about it. 8 pages. The name at the top of those 8 pages, Vasquez Elena R. Rank, Staff Sergeant. Branch, Terran Coalition Infantry Liaison, Attached Units. Unit designation, various. That's what it says. Not a number, not a code. Various. Like someone typed it in a hurry and nobody thought to correct it, and then it calcified that way across 12 years of paperwork because nobody wanted to open the file and look directly at it. I put the mug down. I picked it up again. Took a sip. Regretted it. I opened the incident flags from the beginning. Flag 1 was 18 months into her service. She was 23 years old, young, even by Terran standards, and Terrans age faster than most Coalition species, which always strikes me as unfair, given everything else they seem to have going for them. Deployed to the Kashari corridor as part of a joint infantry operation. The mission, standard perimeter reinforcement around a civilian transit hub, while the Kashari local government negotiated a ceasefire with a splinter faction that had decided to express its political opinions through the creative medium of explosive placement. She was supposed to hold a corridor. The incident flag says she left her post. The incident flag says she left her post, moved 200 meters through an unsecured zone, located a collapsed section of the transit hub's lower level. It removed approximately 600 kilograms of debris using equipment rated for a crew of 4, extracted 11 Kashari civilian refugees who had been trapped since the previous day's bombardment, delivered them to the medical bay, and returned to her post, alone, in an unsecured zone. Using a piece of heavy equipment she was not certified to operate. The flag was issued for abandoning post. The notation closing the flag reads, "Incident nullified. Humanitarian basis, no further action." 11 civilians. She pulled 11 people out of a hole in the ground, alone, and her commanding officer filed a flag on her because she wasn't standing in the right spot while she did it. I noted this down. I timestamp everything. I note things. It is what I do. I moved to Flag 2. Flag 2 was 4 months after Flag 1. Different theatre, same Vasquez. She was attached to a Voth infantry company, the same company whose sergeant I would speak to, and 3 years and a great deal of tragedy later, during a supply interdiction operation on a moon whose name translates roughly from Voth as the place that was probably fine before we showed up. I am paraphrasing. Voth place naming conventions are lyrical in ways that do not survive translation. The mission: secure a supply depot before the enemy faction could strip it. They arrived to find the depot already in the process of being stripped. The enemy faction had a 12-hour head start, and a larger force, and the structural advantage of having gotten there first, which in tactical terms means they had turned the depot into a series of very defensible bottlenecks. The Voth company commander made the call to hold and wait for reinforcements. Vasquez, the only Terran in the unit, attached as a liaison officer, which means technically she was there to advise and communicate, not to make tactical decisions, apparently looked at the situation, looked at the commander, looked at the situation again, and then said something. The flag doesn't record exactly what she said. The Voth commander's incident report describes it as a suggestion, delivered with an unusual degree of confidence for someone of her rank and species. The suggestion was this: send her in through the depot's secondary ventilation system alone with a comm unit and a bag of what the flag's supporting documentation describes only as Terran origin materials, purpose unclear. The commander, was for reasons I find genuinely interesting to contemplate, said yes. She was in the ventilation system for 4 hours. During those 4 hours, the enemy faction inside the depot experienced a series of events that the incident report characterizes collectively as escalating disorientation and material loss. Smoke, not their smoke, coming from inside the walls. Sounds, not identifiable sounds. Sounds that the incident report notes, with what I can only describe as reluctant professionalism, that 3 separate enemy combatants later described as something large moving inside the infrastructure. A junction box that stopped working. Then another junction box. Then all the lights. Then the enemy faction decided, collectively and apparently very quickly, that the depot was not worth the particular flavor of unease they were currently experiencing, and they left. She came out of the ventilation system covered in something the Voth medic described as a substance that should not exist in a ventilation system and which I chose not to formally identify, sat down on the floor of the depot, ate something from her pack, and asked when reinforcements were arriving. The flag was for unauthorized solo tactical engagement. The notation, incident nullified. Mission success achieved. No further action. I closed the report. I opened a new note in my log. I wrote, "What was in the bag?" I stared at that question for a while. By flag 5, I had stopped drinking the keth broth and switched to cold water, which at least tasted like nothing rather than defeat. Flag 5 is the one that made me put down my data unit and sit with my hands folded in my lap for a while, which is not something I typically do in the middle of reviewing administrative files. Flag 5 was filed by a Dranathi colonel named Harsveth. I know Harsveth by reputation, decorated, conservative, the kind of officer who treats regulations the way some species treat religious text, during a humanitarian crisis response on a station I'd actually heard of. Culvin outpost, 6 months after the reactor incident, the one that killed 40-something coalition personnel and left the remaining survivors locked inside a sealed section with a compromised atmosphere and no functional comms. She was not assigned to Culvin. This is the part that required me to sit with my hands in my lap. She was not assigned to Culvin. She was on leave. Terran military leave, which their system allocates, and which is technically mandatory rest time that removes an officer from operational availability. She was on a transit vessel passing within 14 hours of Culvin when the distress signal hit the general band. The general band, the distress signal that every ship in a 2-parsec radius received simultaneously. The signal that the coalition responded to, officially, with assets, in just under 30 hours, because 30 hours is the actual logistical reality of emergency response across the kind of distances involved, and anyone who has worked in logistics knows that 30 hours is genuinely fast. 30 hours. She was 14 hours away. The flag, which is extraordinary, which is a piece of administrative documentation I want to frame and put somewhere, because it is a monument to the gap between regulations and human beings. The flag was filed because she diverted the transit vessel. She was a passenger, on leave, on a civilian transit vessel. The flag does not fully explain how she convinced the captain of a civilian vessel to alter course and approach an active emergency zone in direct violation of 3 separate transit safety protocols. The supporting documentation contains a brief statement from the captain, a Rathani female with 20 years of service, who writes, "She seemed very certain. I found it difficult to disagree with her in the moment. In retrospect, I believe she was correct. She got there in 14 hours. She went in with 2 other volunteers, both Terran, also passengers, also technically on leave, which may or may not be a coincidence, and I genuinely cannot determine whether this constitutes coordination or simply what happens when you put Terrans near a crisis. And they were inside the sealed section for 11 hours. 23 survivors came out. The flag, unauthorized diversion of civilian transit vessel, violation of emergency zone protocols, unauthorized tactical entry. The notation, incident nullified. 23 lives preserved. No further action. As I thought about Harsveth writing that flag, Harsveth, who I know by reputation, who would have written that flag correctly, formally, by the book, and then written no further action beneath it because there was genuinely nothing else to write? I wondered what that felt like. I am going to skip flags 6 through 9. Not because they aren't significant. They are all significant in their way, and in the same way that a structural fault in a bridge is significant. Each one tells you something about the load the bridge is carrying and the questions nobody thought to ask about the engineering. But because I only have so many hours before the station's day cycle begins and my superior, Subdirector Feln, arrives expecting a preliminary report. Feln is Voth. Feln is thorough and methodical and has approximately 0 patience for what she calls soft data, which is her term for any evidence that doesn't fit into a clean column in a spreadsheet. I have been working with Feln for 6 years. I admire her. She also gives me a stress response I typically associate with orbital entry. I need something clean to tell her. I don't have anything clean. Flag 10 is where this story changes shape. Flag 10 is the one that brought me here, to this station, to this borrowed office, and this terrible keth broth, And this log I'm composing at 4 in the morning like a person who has made some questionable life decisions. Flag 10 was filed 8 months ago during the Meridian station incident, the one that is still, officially, classified as an equipment malfunction. The one that officially resulted in the controlled evacuation of approximately 800 coalition personnel from the station's central hub over a period of 6 hours. Officially. I am the Bureau's investigator assigned to determine if the official version is accurate. I've been here 4 days. I already know the official version is not accurate. What I don't know yet is how far the actual version extends, how deep it goes. How many of the people who were here 8 months ago, who I have been interviewing, who have been polite and cooperative and said all the right things in all the right order, which is itself a kind of data? How many of them coordinated the polite cooperative story they're giving me? What I do know is this. She was here. Vasquez, Elena R. She was here 8 months ago during what is officially an equipment malfunction. She is not on the manifest for this station. She was never assigned here. There is no record of her transit, no record of her arrival, no record of her departure. There is only one piece of evidence that she was here at all, and it is the kind of evidence that you don't find in databases. It's the thing the Voth sergeant said to me in a hallway yesterday morning after I'd been talking to him for 2 hours about the incident and he'd been giving me the cooperative polite story with absolute precision. And then I asked, as I was leaving, almost as an afterthought. I've learned to deploy the almost an afterthought question. It took years. It is the only genuinely good investigative technique I've developed. I asked, was there anyone present during the incident who you'd want to acknowledge? He looked at me, the floor, back at me. She's the reason I'm having this conversation instead of not having any conversations at all. That was it. That was all he gave me. But here's the thing about the Voth sergeant, whose name is Keth and who has 312 kilograms of combat experience and who looked at his floor before he looked at me. Keth was assigned to Meridian Station. Keth was here, officially, 8 months ago. Keth's name is on the manifest. And when Keth walked away from me in that hallway, moving toward the station's main operations deck, 3 separate personnel, 2 Terran, 1 Dranathi, saw him coming and stepped aside without being asked. Not protocol, not rank. Not the careful courtesy of junior officers making space for a senior one. They stepped aside the way you step aside for a priest, or a warning. And every single one of them, I noticed things, I timestamped things I was watching, glanced at me first. Not at Keth. At me. At the outsider, with the data unit who'd been asking questions. Then they stepped aside. I should not be arriving at conclusions. I am an administrative investigator. My job is to gather data and present it to subdirectors, who present it to directors, who present it to the kind of people whose decisions produce 11 incident flags and 0 reprimands. My job is not to have opinions. I am going to have one anyway, here in this log at 0517, on the 4th day of an assignment that is doing something uncomfortable to my understanding of how the coalition actually works. I have read every flag. I have interviewed 9 personnel in 4 days. I have requested the full roster of individuals stationed at Meridian during the incident and cross-referenced it against transit logs, and I have found, beneath the official manifest, the one that is clean and complete and makes sense, what I can only describe as a shadow manifest. A series of names that appear in supporting documentation, in the margins of incident reports, in the almost an afterthought things people say when they think the interview is over. Names without official assignment. People who were there without being there. She's not alone. That's the thing. That's the thing I've been sitting with since 0317, since I made my note about the bag and kept reading. Vasquez, Elena R., does not officially exist. But she is not unique in this. She is the most visible shape of something that goes much wider and deeper than one soldier with 11 incident flags and a gift for ventilation systems. She is the part that salutes back. That's what the Dranathi officer told me on day 2 when I asked her what Vasquez was like. She was trying to describe it, the presence, the effect, and she stopped and thought and said, when she walked into a room, everyone straightened, even the ones who outranked her. It wasn't protocol, it was like… She paused, and this was the moment, the almost an afterthought dressed up as a metaphor. It was like she'd already paid for something we didn't know we owed. I wrote that down. She'd already paid for something we didn't know we owed. I don't know what she paid. I don't know when. There's nothing in 8 pages of personnel record that tells me, because 8 pages is almost nothing, and I increasingly suspect those 8 pages are not a thin file. They're a controlled aperture. Someone decided at some point how much light to let through. My job tomorrow is to find out who. Then my job tonight, this morning, 0523 now, is to finish this mug of terrible Keth broth that I should have stopped drinking 2 hours ago, and to open Flag 11, which I have been saving. Flag 11 is marked Other. I've been avoiding it. I've been avoiding it because I've read 10 flags, and I know the shape of her now, in the way you know the shape of a thing you've been circling, and I have a feeling, not a data point, not a column in a spreadsheet, but the kind of soft data that Subdirector Felln has no patience for. I have a feeling that Other is not the end of something. It's the beginning. Flag 11 is 40 pages long. 40 pages. The entire rest of the file. Flags 1 through 10. All the supporting documentation. The incident reports. The closed file notations. The 8 original pages of her personnel record. 47 pages total. Flag 11, by itself. 40 pages. I stared at that for a moment. The mug in my hand. Cold now. I'd forgotten about it. 40 pages filed under Other. The filing officer's name is redacted. I want to note that. In 10 previous flags, every filing officer is named. Haas Veth, Subcommander Yeth, Major P. Lorden. Named, everyone. It's protocol. You file a flag, your name goes on it. That's how accountability works in a system built on documentation. Flag 11, filed by, redacted. The date is 7 weeks ago. The location is also redacted, which is not a thing that is supposed to be possible. Location is a data field. It populates automatically from the operational record. You cannot, inside the standard coalition filing system, produce a location field that reads redacted. You would need to go around the standard system. You would need, specifically, clearances I do not have, and am increasingly aware I should not be encountering evidence of. I made a note. I timestamped it. I kept reading. The incident report inside Flag 11 is not written in the standard format. This is the part where I am going to try to describe something that I think will be difficult to convey accurately in a log entry, because what I mean by not standard format is not simply that the fields were filled out wrong, or the documentation was incomplete. I mean that the incident report inside Flag 11 reads like it was written by someone who had never written an incident report before. Not because it's confused, not because it's inarticulate, because it's honest. Coalition incident reports are a form, a structure. You fill in the sections, personnel involved, timeline of events, material impact, recommended action. You use passive voice where possible. You describe behavior in terms of protocol compliance or deviation. You do not, under any interpretive reading of the standard format guidelines, write things like, I don't know how to categorize this, so I'm going to describe it and let someone else decide. But that's the first sentence of Flag 11's incident report. I don't know how to categorize this, so I'm going to describe it and let someone else decide. Then it describes. I am not going to reproduce the full 40 pages here. I'm going to do what the incident report itself apparently could not. Summarize. 7 weeks ago. A location the filing system has been modified to conceal. A facility I cannot identify from context alone, though certain details, atmospheric readings mentioned in passing, gravity notations, the specific designation of certain structural elements, suggest something large. Something off a standard transit route. Something that is not, in any obvious sense, a military installation. A civilian facility of some kind. The incident? A containment failure. Not the kind that makes the general broadcast band. the kind that gets managed internally by the facility's own security personnel, until it becomes clear that internal management is not sufficient and a different kind of resource is required. I want to be careful about how I characterize what follows, because I am looking at a 40-page report written by someone who appears to have been genuinely trying to be accurate, and the accuracy is doing something strange to me. The facility had 941 occupants, staff, researchers, a transient population of some kind. The report does not specify their designation, and I have a feeling the omission is intentional. And I have a further feeling that following that thread would take me somewhere my current clearance level explicitly does not go. 941 occupants. The containment failure endangered all of them. Vasquez was there. How she got there? Not on the manifest, not on any transit record that exists inside the standard system, is not addressed in the 40 pages. She's simply there, in the facility, when the containment failure begins. She was not alone. This is where I have to slow down, because the incident report spends 12 of its 40 pages on this specific point, and the 12 pages are the ones written in the most careful language, the most deliberate phrasing. Like the author kept going back and rearranging sentences to make sure they were saying exactly what they meant to say and not a millimeter more. She brought people with her, 11 of them, not coalition personnel, not military. The report describes them in terms that are almost entirely logistical. 11 additional operatives, Terran origin, civilian classification, but certain small details accumulate across the 12 pages. One of them knew the facility's secondary ventilation system well enough to move through it in full darkness. One of them apparently identified the specific point of structural weakness causing the containment failure within 40 minutes of arrival, using what the report describes with visible exhaustion as instruments I cannot identify and which were not standard-issue coalition equipment. One of them, during the evacuation of the facility's lower sections, carried a Dranathi male who weighed approximately twice the standard Terran lifting capacity out of a compromised corridor. Carried. The report uses the word carried. It then notes that this is the accurate word and not an approximation. 12 of them. Vasquez and 11 others. None on the manifest. 941 people got out. The containment failure was resolved in 4 hours and 22 minutes. And the 12 people who resolved it were gone before the Coalition's official response assets arrived. I stopped reading at page 24. I stopped because I needed to think, and thinking requires a brief cessation of input. And I had been receiving input in the form of this file, this borrowed office, this station, this assignment, for 4 days without meaningful pause. I sat. The station was quiet. 0547 by then. Day cycle wouldn't begin for another hour and a half. Is the kind of quiet that has a texture to it. Environmental systems, the faint structural resonance of a large installation managing its own weight in orbit. Somewhere distant, the sound of something mechanical doing something mechanical. I thought about what I was supposed to do with this. I am an administrative investigator for the Coalition Bureau of Personnel Integrity. My job, in clear terms, is to identify discrepancies between official records and actual events, and document those discrepancies, and provide a report that allows the Bureau to determine whether further investigation or corrective action is warranted. Discrepancy. Vasquez, Elena R., appears in 11 incident flags at locations and in circumstances for which no official assignment exists. Corrective action. What exactly? This is the question I had been avoiding. The soft data question. The one that doesn't fit in a column. Because the other half of my job, the half that's also in the Bureau's foundational documentation, written there by someone who understood that bureaucratic systems can be weaponized against the things they're supposed to protect, is to assess whether a discrepancy represents a problem or a solution. Most discrepancies are problems. Someone taking resources they shouldn't have. Someone claiming credit they didn't earn. Someone building a shadow record to protect themselves from consequences. I have worked with discrepancies that were solutions exactly twice in my career. In 32 years. Twice. This felt like the third time. I went back to the file. Pages 25 through 31 are where the report changes tone again, and the change is so abrupt, I actually went back and checked the metadata to make sure the pages hadn't been inserted from a different document. They hadn't. Same author. Same timestamp range. The author just broke a little. One in the way that people break in the middle of writing when they're trying very hard to be professional about something that is not at its core a professional experience. Page 25 begins, I want to document something that I believe is relevant to understanding the full scope of this incident, even though I cannot classify it correctly and I am aware it may not be included in the final report. Then it documents this. During the evacuation, facilities upper levels, and a group of approximately 60 occupants, the transient population, the ones whose designation is redacted, were in a section that had been cut off from the primary evacuation routes by a secondary failure that occurred 40 minutes into the incident. Not the original containment failure. A cascading secondary event that the report notes was not anticipated in the facility's emergency response protocols, which is a sentence that I imagine someone wrote while feeling a specific flavor of fury at the people who designed the protocols. 60 people, sealed in, primary routes gone. Vasquez got to them 17 minutes after the secondary failure. The report doesn't explain how she knew. The report doesn't explain how she moved through a section of the facility that was, at that point, actively compromised in ways that the report describes with clinical precision and which I will summarize as very bad. Temperature, pressure, structural integrity in ongoing failure. She got to them. And here is the part the author wanted to document, even though they knew it might not make the final report. She talked to them. Not instructions, not orders. Not the standard emergency protocol language that coalition personnel are trained to use with civilian populations because it's designed to minimize panic and maximize compliance. She talked to them. The report doesn't reproduce what she said. The author, whoever they are, redacted, invisible, writes instead, I was present for approximately 4 minutes of this. I was attempting to assess the structural situation in the section. I found that I could not concentrate on the assessment, so I want to be accurate about why. Then, she was telling them about her grandmother. That's the line. She was telling them about her grandmother. 60 people in a sealed, compromised section of a facility in the middle of a containment failure, and she was telling them about her grandmother. The author writes, it was a deliberate thing. I understood that even watching it. It was not a distraction or a symptom of stress. She was giving them something to hold on to that was not the situation they were in. I watched 60 people stop looking at the walls and start looking at her. I have been in emergency response situations for 9 years. I have not seen that done before. I am documenting it because I believe it is relevant to understanding what this person is and how she should be classified. I do not know how she should be classified. I wanted to document that I witnessed it. Pages 32 through 40 are the administrative pages, the usual close of incident documentation. Material assessment, personnel accounting, timeline reconstruction. Written in proper format, passive voice, all the columns filled. The recommended action field reads, no further action. The second to last page is a request for clearance elevation. The filing officer, whoever they are, requesting that certain elements of this incident be reviewed by personnel with access to classification levels above the Bureau's standard operational ceiling. In 32 years, I have never seen a flag request its own escalation. The last page is a single paragraph. Not in the incident report template, not a standard field. Just a paragraph. I am filing this as other because there is no existing category for it. I am requesting clearance elevation because the existing structure for handling personnel discrepancies was not designed with this in mind. I want to be clear. I am not filing this as a problem. I am filing it because I believe the institution should know what it has. And I am not sure it does. I am not sure it has ever fully looked. I closed the file. I sat in the borrowed office for a while with the empty mug and the station quiet around me, and I thought about Sub-Director Feln, who would arrive in approximately an hour expecting a preliminary report. Feln, who has no patience for soft data. Feln, who is thorough and methodical, and who I respect enormously, and who is going to ask me what I found in 4 days and what I recommend. I thought about what I was going to tell her. The problem with Feln is not that she's wrong. The problem is that she's right in a way that functions very well inside the system and struggles with the edges where the system doesn't quite reach. So I've watched her, over 6 years, produce excellent reports about problems and impeccable recommendations for corrective action, and I have noticed, without ever saying it out loud, that the situations she handles best are the ones where the discrepancy is clearly a problem. This is not that. This is a discrepancy that is 11 people alive who would otherwise not be alive. 23 more. 941 more. A supply depot secured, a transit hub rebuilt, and a sealed section opened. This is a discrepancy that salutes. I'm going to tell you what I decided. I don't usually record decisions in these logs. I record observations, timestamps, noted data points. Decisions belong in reports, properly formatted, recommendation fields filled in, not in the personal log of an administrative investigator who should have been sleeping 4 hours ago. But I'm going to record this one. I'm going to escalate. And not because the filing officer of Flag 11 asked for it, not because I've found something dangerous that needs managing, because I've found something that the institution doesn't have a category for. And when a thing exists outside your categories, it means your categories are wrong. And the correction of wrong categories is, technically, buried in the Bureau's founding documentation, in a section nobody cites because it has never been operationally relevant. Technically, exactly my job. I'm going to write a report that doesn't fit in Feln's columns. She's going to hate it. She's going to look at me the way she looks at things that don't behave correctly. I'm going to recommend that someone with more clearance than I have take a very careful look at a series of incidents that have been individually filed, individually closed, individually marked no further action, and ask a question nobody has formally asked yet. What is this, collectively? What does it mean? Yes, not as 11 separate flags, but as a pattern. What is being built, or what has already been built, in the margins of the official record, in the names that appear in supporting documentation, and the locations redacted from data fields, and the 12 people who were gone before the official response arrived? Who decided how much light to let through? And this is the question that has been in my log since page 2 of Flag 1, dressed up different ways and circling. Who is she actually? Not the personnel record. Not the 8 pages of controlled aperture. The actual person who tells 60 terrified civilians about her grandmother in a compromised room and turns their faces toward her and away from the walls. What is that? What do you do with that? I'm going to shower. I'm going to put on a clean uniform. I'm going to get something from the food synthesizer that tastes like defeat, because that's all this station can offer me biologically. And I'm going to sit in a conference room across from Sub-Director Feln, and I'm going to tell her that I need more time, more clearance, and a significantly larger mandate than the one I arrived with. She's going to say, "What did you find?" I've been practicing the answer. Here's the thing about the almost an afterthought question. The one I deploy at the end of interviews, the technique I spent years developing, the one that gets people to say the thing they were going to say anyway, the thing they couldn't help saying. I asked Keth that question. Was there anyone present during the incident who you'd want to acknowledge? But here's what I haven't told you yet. What I've been sitting with since that hallway. What I've been processing for 4 days in between the flags and the timestamps and the terrible Keth broth. After Keth said, she's the reason I'm having this conversation instead of not having any conversations at all. After he looked at the floor and looked back at me. He said one more thing. Quiet. Not for the record. I don't know if he meant for me to write it down, but I wrote it down. I write everything down. He said, "She's still here, you know." I said, "I'm sorry?" He said, "On the station." She didn't leave. She's been here the whole time you've been here. He paused. She wanted to see what kind of investigator you were. I said, and? He looked at me for a moment, something in his face that I couldn't read then and have been reading differently every time I replay it since. He said, she says you're probably fine. Then he walked away. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if Keth was telling the truth or telling me something designed to make me feel observed, which is its own kind of tactical choice, keeping an investigator off balance. Or if he was, in some way I don't fully understand, offering me something, an invitation, a way in. I don't know if she's still here. I've been trying not to look. I've been trying for 4 days to do my job in the way I know how to do it. Data, timestamps, notes, the patient accumulation of evidence toward a clean report. I've been trying not to think about the fact that I've been circling her the same way the flags have been circling her, approaching, documenting, closing with no further action, and that no further action has never, in 11 cases, been the actual end. Something always comes after. I don't know what comes after me. I close the log. I should note, for the record, for whoever eventually reads this, be for the same reason the unknown author of Flag 11 wanted to document a thing even knowing it might not survive the final report, that on my way out of the borrowed office this morning I passed the station's main corridor junction. 3 personnel were standing there, 2 Terran, 1 Dranathi. The same 3 I'd noticed the day before when Keth walked past them. They weren't doing anything, just standing. Morning shift changeover, probably. Routine. I walked past, and I felt them looking at me. Not the way people look at an investigator. The careful look. The he's the one asking questions look I've been getting for 4 days. Different. The way you look at someone who's just been told something true and you want to know if they understood it. I didn't stop. I kept walking. But I noted it. I always note things.